Here we go again. It's Easter Saturday and I'm in Donegal, and I was live a couple of minutes ago and I had been going great on my introduction and then pressed the wrong button and deleted what I had been saying, so I have to start again, so sorry about that. Last Sunday I posted an article on my page about the privatisation of water. It was an article written by Dr. Rory Hearn from the National University in Maynooth, and one of the comments underneath was made by a man from Donegal called Enda Craig, who seems to know an awful lot more about water than I do. I contacted him and I had many conversations with him throughout the course of the week. I suppose, why have I come to Donegal this afternoon to talk to him? Well, as a mother, I am very concerned about the kind of country that we are creating for our children. It's now at the stage where our children are no longer able to rent a property. Their hope of ever owning a home has been taken from them. The country's resources like our oil, our gas and our fish have been given away. And I suppose one of the things that consoled me was the fact that our water is still owned by us. Water privatisation has become a huge issue across Europe and across the world, where private companies now own the water, and water poverty is a big issue. And you know, up until now I had consoled myself that whatever else we've done in this country, at least our children will inherit our water. However, Enda Craig tells me otherwise, and I have travelled here to Donegal to chat to him. Now, I just want to warn you in advance that Enda, who runs the Buncrana Together web page, is very forensic in his detail. He supports everything that he says with facts and figures. So the conversation with him can become a little bit long-winded at times. So I promise you that I will interrupt him if I feel that our conversation is getting a little bit too long-winded. So I'll just turn him around to face Enda. So Enda, thanks very much for agreeing to talk to me, this afternoon. And I suppose the first thing that you did when I contacted you was you gave me a history of the water charges, or maybe the water protests. So can you just, without going into too much detail, take us back to maybe take the story up when the Troika come in, for example?
Yeah, okay, thanks very much, Anna, and you're very welcome to the Hills of Donegal.
Yes.
I had seen you on Facebook quite a few, but it's nice to meet you in person. And anyway, yeah, I will start. That's actually a good place to start, believe it or not. I could take you back 40 or 50 years, but you'd be here for a week.
Yes.
So we'll start where you suggest,
yes.
Time of the Troika and why they came in and what happened. I will leave the privatisation part to the last, because that is actually the last part of the game, which has now been played by Right2Water and the Right2Water TDs.
Right.
But, okay. To go back to the Troika, you know, we actually had a very important thing in Ireland, which none of the rest of the member states of Europe had, which was the 9.4 domestic water exemption, which was a wonderful thing to have, thanks to Bertie Ahern and Fianna Fáil. They got it when they were trying to save their political necks back in the early 2000s in Dublin, when they, instead of losing a couple of seats that they was looking like they might do, they decided instead, hey, let's go for the exemption. We will save our seats and we will give the people water for free. Bertie was always good at writing checks.
Right.
So wrote the big check and we got the exemption, and we nearly lived happily ever after, but not completely.
Okay, so I'll just interrupt you there. This was the 9.4 exemption under the Water Framework Directive from the EU, isn't that correct?
Part of the River Basin Management Plan.
Yes.
Very, very important, very precious. And once you get it, it's yours forever until you let it away, or you give it away, or you don't bother reapplying for it. Far too precious to let that happen, but believe it or not, that's what they did.
So,
and I will come to that.
So in other words, we now had an EU exemption from paying water charges.
Absolutely. We got it in the year 2000 when the start of the Water Framework Directive came in, and there we were living happily, getting our water paid by general taxation. But knowing that you never get anything completely for free, we must not forget that the government actually brought in 1997 taxes against the people, where they had to pay for a VAT, VRT, and tax on cars. So it's something that people tend to forget a little bit, but we're paying, and we still are paying to this day, but that tends to be forgotten about, because they give you the exemption, free water, but at the same time they're charging you what I'm after just saying to you. But nevertheless, when Fianna Fáil put us over the cliff in 2008, and we were in terrible state, no money. In came the IMF with a big fat checkbook, and they were going to save Ireland. But of course, there's always a price to be paid. So they started looking where they could save money, because now they were in charge, they had the check, and we were beggars on horseback waiting to try and get hauled out of this hole. So needless to say, they looked around and they said, well, the days of free water are over. Sorry guys, that's coming to an end.
Right.
From this day onwards, you got to start thinking water charges. And right away, they put the paper on the table. They called it a memorandum of understanding, put it in front of Brian Lenihan, who hadn't gone now, but at the time he was the Minister for Finance. He signed it, which meant, yes, okay, we accept it. We're going to introduce water charges. They got kicked out very shortly after that, and then came Michael Noonan, Fine Gael, and Labour. In 2011, they reviewed the memorandum of understanding and they accepted it, and away we go again. So now we're on the road. Wasn't too much been said about this memorandum of understanding or what was going on in the background. We have all found this all out with an awful lot of research. So anyway, in 2013, we have Irish Water has been constituted. It is now taken over from all the local authorities. It becomes one commercial entity, and they are now going to take care of everything. Going to give us all a meter, wonderful meter, personal meter to every house to measure our water and get ready for water charges. The name of the game. Phil Hogan is in charge. He's the Minister for the Environment, and Phil Hogan gets out the big bulldozer and says, whether you like it or not, they guillotined the legislation through the Dáil inside of a couple of hours. Should have taken weeks. Answered nothing. Said, listen guys, this is it. Water charges are coming. Like it or lump it, suck it up. Here we come. So that was fine, and they started putting in the meters, and people were beginning to come to terms with what's actually happening here. Didn't really understand too much about the intimate detail until a woman stepped out down in Cork, as I believe, and she was the first woman. She saw them putting in the meters, and she said, enough's enough. She went out and she said, no, it isn't going to happen. Fair play to her, a mighty woman. She started the ball rolling, and it went across the country like wildfire. All of a sudden, everybody was fighting the meters. They were going to protesting, going to the different towns, as I did myself, along with hundreds of thousands, as we well know now. Went to Letterkenny, went to Carndonagh, went all over the place, and many times to Dublin. We tramped the legs of ourselves.
Okay, so I'm going to kind of push this along fairly fast. So people objected to the meters, and they also stopped paying water charges. And the government is now faced with a dilemma. So can you pick up the story then where the EU auditors come in?
Yeah, this is absolutely very important. People understand this. It's actually, this is all down to the people, not down to the politicians or not down to Right2Water. This is down to the ordinary people who said they wouldn't pay the bill. You can send me 10 bills a week for all I care. I'm not paying any of them, and fair play to them, they didn't. And in 2015, the government felt that they had gone over the level which needed to be 50% plus of a revenue stream coming back in from people paying, and they were in a wild hurry to get Irish Water off the exchequer, off the government books, costing them a fortune. So they wanted them to become a commercial entity, stand on your own 2 feet, so that we don't have to carry you any further. And to that extent, they called in Eurostat. And Eurostat comes in, this is a European organisation, they check your books, and if you want to leave a government organisation and become a commercial, you must have 50% plus of a revenue stream coming in. Eurostat looked at it and said, hey, sorry boys, not going to happen. You haven't got what's needed. They tried twisting the books and they tried this and they tried that, but Eurostat said, no, not going to happen. So
in other words, the revenue stream coming in from the water charges was less than 50%.
Less than what was required to allow Eurostat to take them off the books.
Right.
This was a massive kick in the teeth to the government. They were in deep trouble because we stopped the clock there a little bit to appreciate and understand the situation. While they were hoping to get the Irish Water off the books and make them a commercial entity, and also at the same time they were slapping in meters everywhere. They reckon that they had at least €1 billion worth of meters in the ground at this time, and all of a sudden people are not paying. So what do? We've got a terrible problem. The government says we're not going to make it here. We're in terrible trouble. Actually, what it was, the people had the government on the ropes. We had them on the ropes. We could have slit their throats. We had them there for the taking. It was a fantastic place to be in, position to be in. As well as that,
that was 2015.
2015, and as well as that, Anna, at that time, something else came onto the table, which was very, very important, was the mention of the 9.4, because people began to understand water charges and 9.4 weren't compatible. If we had the 9.4, why were they talking about charges? And then we began to understand they're actually trying to do away with the 9.4 to allow them to bring in water charges.
Right. And this was the exemption that we got that came in back with Bertie Ahern.
Absolutely. This general taxation, forget about your water charges, forget about meters, we don't need them. But because the IMF said, guys, you need the money, we're going to pay the bills, that's not going to happen. But the people and the opposition should not get too carried away about what the government wants or what the IMF wants. That's why they're in opposition, is to fight for the will and the representation from the people. So at that time, when there was this great victory and people were really marching and showing great determination, ordinary people in a very, very calm way were saying, forget it, we're not paying, and that was the bottom line. So now you have the government, they're $1 billion on the ground with meters, they're stuck in a hole because they can't get Irish Water off the exchequer, and the people are beginning to shout to continue with the 9.4. Can you imagine that if we continued to get with the 9.4, how was Fine Gael and Labour going to explain the fact that they had €1 billion lying deep in the ground might never be used?
Well, I know this is a little aside, but the company that was responsible for putting in the meters was actually SiteServe, which is owned by Dennis O'Brien, which was given to him in mysterious circumstances that have been raised in the Dáil by Catherine Murphy over and over again. But that's a discussion for another day.
Yeah.
So
it was a great opportunity to give Dennis a wee clip too. How many SiteServe he could have done with it?
Okay.
Give him a lash.
Okay. So, what happened then in 2015 to get us into the sorry mess that we're in now?
The sellout and the betrayal, as I know it, and some other people. By the way, Jim Quigley is co-author of Buncrana Together. I don't want to be taking all the credit here, more so than I am actually. 2015, as I was just telling you, we have the government up against the ropes. They're in deep shit trouble, if you don't mind me saying that, Anna.
Okay.
And they are in a lot of trouble, and we feel we have them. And then all of a sudden, we find out that in 2015, Right2Water, the unions, have sneaked off over to Brussels to take part in a thing called a Citizens' Initiative.
Now, okay, who are Right2Water?
Right2Water made up of a number of unions. As they took a big interest in this whole thing because they saw it was from the people and the ordinary people, and they inveigled themselves in to become part of it along with some of the politicians in Dublin. And all of a sudden we then began to see politicians taking an interest in it. You had they called them the Right2Water TDs. That was Sinn Féin, People Before Profit, Solidarity, Independence for Change, and Social Democrats. They all combined to call themselves the Right2Water TDs. And they all became part of this great movement, and they were out front, and the people at that time were happy to follow them because we felt they were being honest, they're genuine, and we had a feeling we were going places. Little did we know where we were going. We were going over the cliff as well, but at that time we didn't know.
Okay, what happened?
Well, Right2Water Right2Water, the unions went across to Brussels at the invitation of Sinn Féin. They went over there where there was a citizens' initiative, and part of the citizens' initiative of which Lynn Boylan was the rapporteur in charge of the whole operation.
So she's the Sinn Féin MEP.
Sinn Féin MEP.
Yes.
And the most important part of that citizens' initiative, as far as we were concerned, it is a pretty extensive subject, but the part that interested us was actually paragraph 92, which for the first time we see mentioned when you go to it, where they intend to bring in progressive charges. That's just another way of saying charges for excessive use. In other words, you're going to be allowed, this was to be a United Nations thing where you're allowed, every citizen is allowed a small little daily allowance, and once you pass that level, then they charge you. In other words, for the first time ever, we're going to commodify water. Instead of fighting for the 9.4 to continue it, now we have the Right2Water and the TDs pulling off on a different direction altogether. Instead of sticking with the 9.4 and jumping on the government because we have them in a hole.
Okay, now we just need to pause here because this is actually groundbreaking. This was really a defining moment in the history of water. Up until that point, we had the 9.4 exemption, which meant that under EU law, we didn't have to pay water charges. Now we have the Right2Water group, which is an amalgam of trade unions, concerned citizens and TDs in Europe, coming back with this notion of excess water charges.
You absolutely have it, spot on. Can't believe it. This was the beginning of the betrayal, beginning of the sellout. And they should not have been there. They should not have touched it with a 40-foot barge pole. Leave it alone. It's not in our interest. We should have been concentrating on giving the knockout punch to the government and getting them to agree. Because, by the way, at that time, we had Fianna Fáil in our camp as well, who were shouting there will be no water charges. Now they changed, and that we know that. But at that time, we had the numbers, and they had to stick to it. But all of a sudden, we got this call by, I think it was Owen O'Brien, the Sinn Féin TD.
He's the partner of Lynn Boylan.
Yes, indeed.
Yes. And
he started shouting, we'll have to have a special commission to look into the future of water charges. Now, what the hell was the need for that? We knew what we wanted. Right. We didn't want a commission. We want the 9.4 to continue.
Okay, let me interrupt you there now. Fast forward. So a committee is set up in the Dáil, is that right?
Yeah, out of the expert commission, they decided, no, we now need to get a cross-party commission to go committee to go into the Dáil and sit in secret meetings for. They had 31 meetings, most of them in secret. We tried our best to find out what went on in there. They wouldn't let us know about it. Even we went to the ombudsman, information ombudsman, wouldn't be told.
Okay, can
tell us.
I hold you there? Was anybody apart from the people on Right2Water allowed to be on that commission?
Well, you had actually Right2Water unions were not on it, though they were invited in as expert witnesses, which to this day we have no understanding why they were there, because when the two representatives from Right2Water unions came in, that was Fitzpatrick and Gibney. Sorry, I don't remember their first names. Dave Gibney, okay, Steve Fitzpatrick. They came in, and it was quite unbelievable, Anna, that when you look at the video, as you say, we have backed up everything, you can see him being asked, do they agree? Does Right2Water agree with charges for excessive use? 3 times he said yes.
Who asked him that question?
The Fianna Fáil guy who was on the bench at the time.
Was chairing the committee.
Barry Conn, Fianna Fáil guy, put it to him. And we have it, it's there, can't be disputed. And like all of a sudden, we are watching and we're witnessing all those people who told us that they were fighting against water charges and fighting for the 9.4, who have veered off away totally and completely from where the fight should be. Okay. And now they're talking charges.
Okay, so the commission winds up and what happens?
The committee, this now is the Committee on Water Charges, the Oireachtas Committee on Water Charges, and on the 5th of April 2017 they produced a report. It's called the Draft Confidential Report. Nevertheless, what it means is that they have sent it out on the 5th of April 2017, sent one to every member of the committee, and we have the following morning, We didn't know about this until the following morning, when all the Right2Water guys all come together and they have a big meeting on the media plinth on the Dáil, in front of the RTE cameras, where they make this most fantastic claim, the one that we all remember, the one that we all jumped up and down and rock and roll to.
I did myself.
Well, yeah, absolutely. They claimed a great victory. When you
Yes.
see it, you can see Owen O'Brien saying, this is the greatest day ever in the history of the campaign for waters, blah, 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 and all that.
Who else was there?
Boyd Barrett
Yes.
was there. Actually, when you look, there's about 20 of them there. I can't give you the names
Was
for the whole of
Catherine
them.
Murphy there?
She was there, Catherine Murphy. Our man from Donegal, Mr. Pringle, what do you call him, was there. Seamus Healy was there. Actually, they were all there. All the political parties that I told you were involved in Right2Water were all assembled, and they all marched out like reservoir dogs up to the Dáil media plinth, and they made this big statement.
Claiming victory.
Claiming victory. Water charges were gone.
But it was a Pyrrhic. It was a Pyrrhic victory.
It was, without a shadow of a doubt, because they said no more metering, and that referendum was there for us. Now,
so let's get into the nitty-gritty details of that report. Let me guess. There's no mention of the 9.4 exemption, and it's all about excess water charges.
You're spot on, Anna. Absolutely. We actually were probably the first in the country to get a copy of that confidential draft report, and Jim and myself looked at it in great detail. Quite honestly, could hardly believe it. As you rightly say, not a word about what we thought they were there to be fighting for, which was a 9.4, and it was all to do with metering and especially charges for excessive use. Now, we could not believe this.
So in other words, this is probably the moment of one of the greatest sellouts of Ireland in our entire history. Maybe since the Act of Union.
Yeah, I well believe it, because it affects every family in every town and every county in Ireland.
It affects our children, and it affects the generations that are yet to come.
To understand that, Anna, you must understand what charges for excessive use really means.
Yes.
And when you understand that, then I will agree with you that it was the greatest sellout of all times. Charges for excessive use, they didn't make much ado about it when they were giving us a great claim for victory. It was only when we began to drill into the forensic detail that we began to see a picture emerging which was anything but a victory. In fact, it was terrible. Absolutely shameful and terrible what was happening here, and we can prove it to the last. The charges for excessive use means you get 133 litres per day per person. That can vary a little bit, but it's neither here nor there. And after that, you are charged for anything above it. Now, the thing is, let's not worry too much about the amount and all that. It's the principle of commodification. When I say commodification, it's the first time that there is a charge put on water and accepted by the government, and they're going to be charging you and me for the use of that water running through our meter, which they said we'd never get, but we'll all have one. It is commodification because...
So water is now a commodity.
Yes.
And once we have a commodity, then the rules of the Lisbon Treaty come into play, which are explained.
Now you have it. Now you have it. This is so important. In 2009, Ireland signed up to the Lisbon Treaty, and part of that, I just cannot remember, but it's in our article, the exact numbers on it, but we have it. 241, I think. 142? 142, yeah. My friend here tells me 142. And in it there, it tells you that any member state, when you have a service or a good that becomes a commodity and it's sold at unit price, then you have no choice. Then you are bound by the treaty that you have signed up to, and that is now becomes privatisation. You actually, the words they use for it, which are very nice, you have to open it up to competition.
Okay, so just let's pause for a moment. Future governments have no choice. They literally have no choice under the Lisbon Treaty.
And they had a choice if they hadn't to go anywhere near that.
I know that, but now they have brought in legislation. I think they're currently bringing in legislation. That legislation is being drafted at the moment, or has it been drafted?
No, it's already drafted.
It's drafted.
I'll tell you, because then we can finish off and say that once they commodified the water and it became for sale, and as you know, the provisions of the Lisbon Treaty are now applied to it. Therefore, they have no longer any choice. So we're on the road to privatisation. We're not on the road to a great victory. We're on the road to the cliff. Well on the road to the cliff. Now, when actually that draft confidential report was brought in on the 6th of April, and they all went up on the plinth and they shouted and roared about it, then they said that there was collective agreement. You'll see that when you look at the little video. There was collective agreement, and that they were now going in on the afternoon to agree the contents of the draft confidential report, which included, most of all, charges for excessive use. But what they didn't tell us was that there had been a difficulty the night before when Fine Gael, Kavanagh, saw the contents of the report that had been sent to everybody by the chairman of the Oireachtas Committee on Water Charges. He did not like the fact that there was supposed to be more in there to do with metering, which he had agreed with Fianna Fáil quietly about a week before. And he threatened a general election if this went ahead, and he said, we will not accept it. So there was now a fly in the ointment. So when Owen O'Brien said on the video that he was going in to formally accept this and vote on it and away we go, he well knew that wasn't going to happen. So they spent the next week diddling and doodling with the wording on metering. Not a word, Anna, about the 9.4, not a word about charges for excessive use. And when you see the official explanation given by Right2Water as to what actually happened in relation to the outcome of the confidential report on water charges, they're trying to say that Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael acted outside of the report and they made big changes. The only changes they made had to do with metering. Though that's of no importance to us, really, it's not. The fact is, they did not address the charges for excessive use. Once they accepted that and it was left there safe and sound, we were finished. Or as they say up in Donegal, we were bollocksed.
Oh God, that's desperate language. I'll be put off Facebook. Can we just pause there for a moment? I'm sure that there are people who have just joined us now and they haven't a clue what's happening. I'm here with Enda Craig from Buncrana Together, a group here in Donegal who have led the charges against water, and you can watch back over this video. He tells the story of how the Irish people have been betrayed by Right2Water, which is an amalgam of trade unions and civil groups and TDs from Sinn Féin, people before profit and so on. And we have been betrayed in that the exemption that we had under EU law, the 9.4 from the River Basin Framework
Management Plan.
The River Basin Management Plan. That exemption has been let slip, and they have agreed to excessive charges. Now, agreeing to excessive charges for water use means that water is now a commodity, and under the Lisbon Treaty, the government now has no other option but to open up the sale of water to competition.
Road to privatisation.
So we're now on the road to privatisation and the handing over of the country's water to private companies. Now, people are writing here, can we do anything about this?
Well, this is a good time to mention now about privatisation, because you have mentioned it, and as we all know, they think they have sold us a pup. We did an article on that in relation to the charges, and they think that we have swallowed that hook, line and sinker, but some have. A lot of people are coming around to the truth of it, and we begin to see what really happened. Because to finish off on that, the report on the Committee for Water Charges went to the Dáil, was voted on, and it was passed. It became part of the Water Services Act 2017, which then became a central part of the second River Basin Management Plan, which was sent over to Brussels last year for consideration to become the new charging strategy which will be applied by the Irish government, which includes the charges for excessive use, the road to commodification, the road to privatisation. Now, of course, you'd say, well, wait a minute, hold on. Isn't Right2Water and the Right2Water TDs shouting about we have to have a referendum? How can there be privatisation when there is, when they're saying we want to protect our water by way of constitutional referendum? Now the thing to do here is that here we go, we're on the second road to betrayal, because when you look at Deputy Joan Collins's wording in relation to what she's putting forward for the water referendum, you'll see that she's asking for protection for the water services. Now, the word to watch here is services, because I worked with the ESB. I was there when they did the privatisation in the ESB, so I well understand the carry-on that's going on here, and the truth is an awful lot different to what they're pretending to be the real thing. What it means, Anna, it means that this referendum of the water services will protect the water treatment plants, it will protect the reservoirs, it will protect the piping coming down from the treatment plants to your house, but it will not protect the one thing which it's meant to protect above and beyond everything else, and which we care most about, most passionately, the water. These unbelievable people think we are so stupid that we can't see through what they're doing. I have written to Deputy Collins so many times, and
what has the response been?
I have been deleted and then blocked. I could build a house with the number of people that have blocked me. I have that many blocks. It's unbelievable. Every time I challenge what they're doing in a civil way, never abusive, they just block you, because they know we are pushing our finger into a place where they do not want us to go. We have found out the truth of the betrayal, the truth of the sellout, the truth of what these shameful people are doing to the people of Ireland and to the generations yet to come. And it is a shameful, atrocious business that they're doing. Now, when you must understand that that is solid fact. You talk to people, and I know it for a solid fact, that it will not protect the water.
Okay.
Joan, and that is so important to understand.
Okay. So, the government has been placed in a bind. Now, they have, it's a given that we're going to have water charges. The other interesting thing is that the amount of water that is allocated to each person will be reduced over time. So, in actual fact, the legislation has been written in such a way that we may end up with no water, with no, what's the word I'm looking for? No water allowance, that people will have no water allowance.
Absolutely.
And I know that I didn't pay my water bills at the time, even though I would have been in a position to do so. And I was vilified by many people saying, you have to pay for your water, water has to be paid for. But for me, it was the principle, because I knew instinctively and intuitively that the government was on a mission to privatise our water. That's the first thing. And the second thing that really galls me is this, that if you are a family on a low income struggling with a weekly income of between €400 and €500, and you get a bill in the door for €200 or €300, it sinks you. Whereas if you are somebody in a professional job with a big wage, €200 or €300 is what you pay for a family meal in a restaurant at the weekend with a couple of bottles of wine, no bother. So, it's all relative. It's, everything is relative. For the vast majority of people, a water bill is going to sink them. For the privileged people who are in a well-paid job, in a permanent well-paid job, it's nothing to them.
Yeah, and facilitated, Anna, by Right2Water and the people that we tramp the country for, and people that we put our trust in, people that we voted for, those of our own. Why is the Irish people always destined to be let down by their own and be betrayed by their own. By the way, that's a very important point that you just mentioned. I'll quickly refer to it. That why would they put it into the legislation that the daily allowance can be reduced and then abolished completely? Because they needed to put in a daily allowance to give the impression that water charges were gone, because that was actually the only part of the whole deal which was going to be free, which was that small allowance. Now, once they deem it the time is right, they will reduce it and then they will abolish it, and then we have full-on water charges, and then we will have full-on open competition as per the Lisbon Treaty. And hey, you know what they'll do? They'll start blaming Fianna Fáil and they'll start blaming Fine Gael as if it had nothing to do with them, when they were the authors of it, they instigated it, and they brought it along in a very planned and premeditated way.
So for once, the blame is not on Fianna Fáil, is not on Fine Gael, it is on the people that we would hope would have a different vision for this country. Sinn Féin, People Before Profit, what's the group that Catherine Murphy belongs to?
Independence for Change?
Yeah. Okay, now I'm conscious of the fact that this has been a very long conversation, and I'd say at this stage people are starting to switch off in great numbers because people only have a certain level of a certain level of attention, a certain span of attention. So, is there any glimmer of hope? I've driven all the way up to Donegal. Is there any hope you can give us?
Yeah, there is. There is a slight. As some people might know, not that many. We actually gathered up €2,000. I don't say that as a big boast, but we had to get an appointment and a consultation with a senior counsel called Matthias Kelly. This guy is an expert on the 9.4, and we went to him specially to find out what is the present position and is there any hope at the end of the tunnel. And he said, yes, there is a possibility that the personal allowance, the personal allowance should well become the next. Jim, I keep forgetting the name of that. What do you call it in the River Basin Management Plan? What do you call that thing that's a core part of the 9.4?
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
Well, anyway, it's the part. I have a block about that one, but he says it can become that, and if you can get that. And if that can be written into the wording of the proposed constitutional amendment, so that instead of them being allowed to reduce and then abolish the daily allowance, that it is there forever, constitutionally protected. No vulture company or no private company will ever want to touch a situation where the people of the country have an access to a free allowance. It's not nearly as good as the 9.4 that we had, but it's enough to stop privatisation.
Are we going to get a referendum on water?
That's up to the people. There's great chat about Joan Collins is making a big hoo-ha, fiddly-do, about have actually delayed it. But you know what? Based on the wording as it stands, it's actually fortuitous that it's delayed, because the wording at the minute is totally defective, and they need to do what this senior counsel told us. He says that needs to go into the wording of the proposed referendum so that it becomes part of the referendum, and it makes your free allowance for all times. He said that's absolutely not a problem. He said this is the only chink of light you've got. If you do that, they will never privatise it.
Okay, so now we've got to get people to look for that daily allowance to be included in the wording of the referendum, which will enshrine our water in the Constitution.
Let that committee in the assembled to look into the possibility of a constitutional amendment. Let them stop talking silliness. Let them stop talking defective wording on their proposed people that asks her to please explain. Let Owen O'Brien start explaining what do they not agree that the way it's written at the minute, you will only protect the reservoirs, the treatment plants and the piping and not the water. That has to be addressed, and they would need to cut out the old carry on the rat and pretending that this wording means something. Paul Murphy was on Facebook the other day and said how great the wording was. He's another guy who needs to stop the carry on and pretending. They've done enough of hoodwinking. They put us over the cliff enough with the water charges. Now they want to do it with the referendum as well.
Okay, well, there you have it. I did warn you that Enda is very forensic when it comes to giving information. What can we do? Well, he has explained it very, very clearly to us. Our only hope is now to call for a referendum which will include the daily allowance in the wording of any new protection that we're going to give water in our constitution. And it beholds all of us now to really take head on these TDs that have sold us out. Joan Collins, Owen O'Brien, Catherine Murphy, all of these TDs. You know, they need to be told on the doorsteps now in the upcoming elections what they have done. And I just want to thank you for watching. I wish you a very happy Easter. As I say, the reason why I've come up all the way to Donegal to do this is because I really do care. I really, really do care as an Irish mother what is happening to this country. The way it's going, there will be absolutely nothing left for our children or our grandchildren. And please share, and thank you very much. Oh. If I could just press this button now.